Okay, good morning, everybody. And we are on to the last chapter of 1 Corinthians, chapter 16, okay, where Paul gives the closing instructions and salutations to the church. And the first 4 verses is about the contribution. Can somebody unmute and read for us, please? The first 4 verses.
Okay, I read. Now about the collection for God's people. Do what I told the Galatian churches to do. On the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with his income, saving it up so that when I come, no collection will have to be made. Then when I arrive, I will give letters of introduction to the men you approve and send them with your gift to Jerusalem. If it seems advisable for me to go also, they will accompany me.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. So this is Paul showing himself to be a very practical man. Okay, he has been talking about the lofty realm of thought and theology. You know, he's been thinking and talking about theology, God's teaching, God's word on the life of the world to come. And that was what we just finished in chapter 15, talking about resurrection, the life of the world to come, something in the future. Yet he also deals with the practical things in a practical way. So you can see that Paul is a very realistic person. Okay, he's very down to earth. He's not a visionary, you know, somebody who dreams of the future and what the possibilities of the future are. He's not a visionary whose head was in the clouds or talk about theology, speculation, and then lost in practical matters. He's not that kind of dreamer. Okay, even though he had his head in the clouds, that means he knows so much about theology. His feet were always planted firmly on the realities of life and living matters. So he's a person who is still very focused on the living realities of what goes on in life here. Okay, so you can see it's important to have a balance of both because the spiritual and theological will give us a focus. And our real everyday life, we have to live guided by that focus, not out of touch with everyday life reality. Okay, so live with the theological focus of God's promises for the future, if also with the practical implications and reality of earthly life. So it's a combined. Okay, how do we integrate the two so that it becomes one consistent, integrating the two, one consistent, integrate the two to become one consistent. So consistency with God's truth is very important. At the same time, being realistic in the consistency. So he turns his attention now to the collection, you know, an offering for the poor saints at Jerusalem. This is an undertaking, it's a project very dear to his heart. And somebody just help us turn to Galatians 2:10 and another person to Acts 24:17 to show this person's very practical heart. Galatians 2:10, read for us from verse 8 So from chapter 2, verse 8 to 10.
Read Galatians 2, verse 8 to 10. For God, who was at work in Peter as an apostle to the circumcised, was also at work in me as an apostle to the Gentiles. James, Cephas, and John, those esteemed as pillars, gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship when they recognized the grace given to me. They agreed that we should go to Gentiles, and they too the circumcised. All they asked was that we should continue to remember the poor, the very thing I had been eager to do all along.
Yes, thank you. So what happens here is we see that James, Peter, and John, the apostles of Jesus, okay, they affirm Paul's appointment as an apostle to the Gentiles, and he tells Paul to remember the poor, okay, to care for the poor. And so you can see his attention and his heart is for the poor. Now, Acts chapter 24, verse 17.
Acts 24, verse 17. After several years away, I returned to Jerusalem with money to aid my people and to offer sacrifices to God.
Thank you. All right. So this is Paul giving testimony that he came back to Jerusalem to bring the money offerings to help the poor. All right. So you can see that Paul is a very practical person caring for the poor. Now, there was this spirit of brotherliness in the ancient world among people, not just the Christians. You see, the Greeks, they had associations, something like our Singapore Hokkien Hui Kwan, the clans. Like the clans, the Greeks also had associations called eranoi. If a person was in sudden need or fell on evil day, so that means a person suddenly became poor, his friends would club together, so they joined together to raise an interest-free loan to help him. Okay, so you see that the spirit of brotherliness among the Greeks. Then the Jews, the synagogue also had officials whose duty was to collect from those who had to share out to those who did not have. They are helping the poor as well. Frequently, the Jews who had gone abroad, Jews who work in other countries and they prospered, they did very well. They would send their messengers or envoys to Jerusalem with contributions for the temple and for the poor. All right, so it's like last time our China people came to Singapore, they send money back home to their families. All right, so down here, it is not necessary to the families, but to the poor in general. Now, Paul does not want the Christian church to lag behind the Jewish and the heathen world in generosity. So you can see it is a kind of a giving world, people who help other people in need, okay? And so Paul also wants the Christian church to do the same thing. Because if non-Christians are doing it, how come the Christians are not doing it? So Paul is not new to making a collection for the poor, right? He has done this with the Galatians before, and in doing so, it is his principle to unite the Church of Christ everywhere he goes. So this is something that he does so that all churches, no matter everywhere, they feel a sense of brotherhood, they feel a sense of family, they feel a sense that they are one in Christ. So he tells the Corinthians to do the same thing that he has done with the Galatians. And so he has a very practical method of systematic giving. And he tells them to set aside an amount of money appropriate to their income on the first day of the week. So on Sunday, they will set aside a small amount that they feel is suitable for their income. And literally, this means as the person has been prospered by the Lord. So that is to say, as much as God bless you with your income, then you set aside a sum of money to help the poor. So this is not tithing, okay? This is not tithing, but this is an offering to help the poor. And so Paul actually starts this system where he actually asked them to set aside a sum of money every Sunday. First day of the week is Sunday. Every Sunday to give to the poor. Because their meetings are at people's homes, they don't need to pay rental for church building and bills and all that. Okay, so they did not have the need to collect money except here to give to the poor. Systematic giving means Paul did not need to have a collection when he arrives. Okay, so that is to say, if they have been collecting their little bit of offering for giving to the poor every Sunday, by the time he comes, the collection money is all collected already over each week. It is already when he comes. Now, people would have had time to think, consider, and if you want to pray, then pray, and then put aside the amount they have determined. All right, so all the thinking through how much to give and whether they want to pray about how much to give and so on, it's all already done. By the time Paul comes, it's just gathering the whole collection together. And Paul will then send the collection to Jerusalem through people selected by the Corinthians themselves, people they trust, with letters of introduction for them. And you can see accountability is expected and practiced. Okay, they're very careful with the collection of money. It seems that abuse of trust funds had been very common among the Jews, that the Roman authorities provided an escort for the protection of funds being sent to Jerusalem. All right, so question of honesty had been a problem. So you had the Roman authorities step in to make sure that it no longer is a problem. And Paul says, if appropriate, he will travel with those who have the letters and money. So he'll go along with them. But they will send their representatives as witnesses of how the money is transferred to the Jerusalem church and given to the poor. So you note how Paul handles money carefully. Yeah, in order to avoid any allegations of dishonesty that he cheated money. And similarly, he encourages Christians to do the same, right? Handling money that is not ours, that is meant for a cause. It's very important to be open and to be handled where people can see how it is done. So the idea of a collection for the poor at Jerusalem means a lot of things to Paul. Okay, so to us today, we might think simply it's just, okay, I give the money, that's it. Right, but for Paul, there's a lot of meaning behind giving to the poor. So he uses various words to describe a collection. Okay, he uses words like a charis. And this is a gift freely given. And remember, charis is a spiritual gift. The charismata, the spiritual gifts from God, speaking in tongues, prophecy, and so on. Okay, so giving a collection to the poor, that giving is also a charis, a grace, a gift given freely. And you can find references, which we're not going to turn to here. You can turn to at your own free time. Another word he used is koinonia. Koinonia is our word we normally translate fellowship, or another word, partnership. So he uses the word partnership, sharing with others, as an idea for collecting. Okay, so it's a gift It's a partnership of sharing. It's a diaconia. It's your practical Christian service. So for the people giving, you see, for the people giving, it is a form of service, something practical. Then one more is hydrotes, abundance, giving out of your abundance. That means how much God has blessed you. Out of that, you give what you can give out of your abundance. Eulogia, or is a bounty, extra blessing from God. Phosphora, an offering. Oh, it's also a sacrifice. Yeah, you make an offering, but it also is an idea of sacrifice. So it's giving up something that will cost you a sacrifice. Okay, so more than just giving, it's out not just abundance and bounty, but it's also a sacrifice. And then one more word is liturgia. Liturgia. And originally, this is a voluntary service of the state, privilege to help. Wow, so Paul has got 2, 4, 6, 7 words that he uses to talk about collecting to give to the poor. All right, so you can see how there is a richness in the way Paul plans. The richness behind Paul's thinking of giving to the poor is a gift we freely give voluntarily, all right, as a partnership, fellowship of sharing with people, is a practical service to them, giving of our abundance and plenty, but it's also an offering and a sacrifice, giving up something that will cost us. So very rich meaning for Paul. Now, a little bit on liturgia, this last one, okay? Liturgia in classical Greek is a word with a noble history, something like philanthropy like that. Huh? In the great days of Athens, see, there were generous citizens and they volunteer out of their own pockets to shoulder the expenses of some project or enterprise that the city was embarking on. For example, to defray the cost of training a chorus for some drama or some team to compete for the honor of the city in the games. A little bit like sponsorship. Sponsorship for Team Singapore or sponsorship for Team Athens in, let's say, Olympic Games. Okay, so it might be to pay for outfitting and manning a trireme or a man of war. Long ago, we talked about trireme, right? Trireme is a warship, man of war. You have a boat with people sailing, right? With people rowing. So the generous citizens might pay to outfit. That means to make or to man. That means they pay the workers, right, in rowing the boat in the time of the city's peril. That means when they're fighting a war with another place. Now, a liturgia was originally a service of the state voluntarily accepted. So they give it voluntarily. And to Paul, Christian giving is something which must be volunteered. It should be accepted as a privilege to help God's household in some way. All right, so it's a privilege. It's voluntary privilege. So in this case here, he calls it a logia. Okay, a logia. So you see, not within these 2, 4, 6 words, he has another 8th word. Logia means an extra collection. It's not a tax that a man has to pay, so it's not compulsory like tithing, but an extra piece of giving that he's not compelled to. Of course, the first basic idea of a collection is to meet needs. Basic idea, meet needs. And this is a way to put into effect the practical teaching of Christianity. Paul is providing his converts the opportunity to translate Christ's teaching on the virtue of love into practical action. Talk about love, then love is not just inside your heart or inside your mind, you think about love, or inside your emotions, but it's practical things that you do, that is love. It's a way of teaching the scattered Christians, Christians all over their ancient world, that they are not members of a congregation only, but they're members of a universal church, right? They are members not just of this one church here, for example, in Bishan, but members of a universal church, the church of God in every country, right? With obligations to the rest. We have a certain amount of responsibility. Now, it represents a unique gesture of solidarity. A gesture of solidarity by the Gentiles to Jews. Because it was normal for the Jews of the dispersion, that means Jews that have been scattered out from Jerusalem. It was normal for Jews who have been scattered out of Jerusalem to send gifts to fellow Jews in Jerusalem. So they send money back for those who prosper and do well. But the Gentile churches collect money for Jewish Christians. It shows the nature of the gospel. What does it show about the gospel of Christ? It can break down the race barrier. The gospel of Christ says there's no such thing as you are Indian, you are Spanish, you are Chinese, you are Eurasian, you are Italian, okay, or you are Greek, or you are Jew. It breaks down all these barriers. Okay, it dissolves any wall of hostility. Okay, any differences, it dissolves all these differences between Jew and Gentile, and between men and men. Okay, so we can see that what we do for and with fellow Christians and Christian brothers and sisters in our local congregation, right where we are and everywhere, shows the common bond we have, that we are a household in Christ and also citizens of a united heavenly kingdom. Okay, so caring for fellow Christians, whether in our own church or in other countries, churches in other places, or in Singapore or in other countries, it shows we have a common bond. And we are a family, a household in Christ. And the bigger picture, we are citizens of a heavenly kingdom, and we are united as one. Okay, let's look at the travel plans of Paul after he has talked about connection. Can somebody help us read verses 5 to 9, please?
First Corinthians 16, verse 5 to 9. After I go through Macedonia, I will come to you, for I will be going through Macedonia. Perhaps I will stay with you a while, or even spend the winter, so that you can help me on my journey wherever I go. Verse 7, I do not want to see you now and make only a passing visit. I hope to spend some time with you, if the Lord permits. But I will stay on at Ephesus until Pentecost, because a great door for effective work has opened to me, and there are many who oppose me.
Thank you. Okay, so what happens here is Paul has just talked about the collection for the poor. And the next thing he says, okay, after collecting, then of course your collect, I will have to come to you, right? So Paul is actually planning to visit them. Okay, and this is his travel plan. I will go through Macedonia before I come to you. Okay, where is Paul at this moment? Paul is now at Ephesus. Okay, so let me show you the map. Okay, show you on the map. Let me enlarge the map first. This is this part here. Can you see my cursor? This is Ephesus. You can see this black dot here, right? Ephesus, and then across the Aegean Sea is Corinth. Athens is here. Corinth is here. Corinth is on an isthmus. An isthmus is a little strip of land between two bigger strips of land, two bigger portions of land. Okay, an isthmus. Corinth is on the isthmus. So what happens is Paul's plan is he's now at Ephesus, all right, and he plans to travel to Macedonia up here. So he plans to travel north to Macedonia, to the churches there. And Macedonia includes Philippi, Thessalonica, and the very special place, the Berea. Okay, so he plans to go up there, and then from there he plans to travel down to Corinth, and from there he will pick up the money that he has asked them to collect for the poor. So the whole idea is from Ephesus, where he is based now at the moment. Okay, he will go to Macedonia, visit the churches there, and then he will collect their collection, and then come down to Corinth, collect the collection, and then he would go all the way back to Jerusalem. Okay, he would go with the collection to Jerusalem with the people who represent the church who have given the money to help the poor. All right, so that is Paul's travel plan, okay, that we have just looked at on the map. But at the moment, as you can see, he says, I don't want to just make a passing visit to you. I don't want to just cross over the Aegean Sea to you, pick up the money and then run. Okay. I want to actually spend some time with you, if God permits, of course. But at the moment, he's at Ephesus, where he says, a great door for effective work has opened to me. So there's a chance for sharing the gospel, but there's also many people who oppose him. He's facing trouble. He's facing opposition. All right. So that is his travel plan. And so we see that he explains that he hopes to visit them soon. And he mentioned that in chapter 4, verse 19. Okay. And here he says he hopes to spend the winter with them. So spend maybe at least 3 months, and that they will help him on his way. That is, provide them the opening to be part of his future ministry. Elsewhere, he will talk about a church freely giving support as a partner with him in the gospel. Can somebody help us turn to Philippians 1:5 and 4:15. Philippians 1:5 and 4:15.
Okay, I read. Philippians 1:5. For you have been my partners in spreading the good news about Christ from the time you first heard it until now.
Okay, 4:15.
4:15. Okay. As you know, you Philippians were the only ones who gave me financial help when I first brought you the good news, and then traveled on from Macedonia. No other church did this.
Okay, so thank you. That was Paul's experience with the church at Philippi. All right, they were his partners. Remember just now we looked at the number of words Paul used for giving. They were his partners in the gospel. Philippians chapter 1, verse 5. Okay, because of your partnership in the gospel. So from the very beginning, they had been a giving church. And then 4 verse 15 shows that they were actually the very first church to share with him the matter of giving and receiving. All right, so he speaks of a church freely giving support as a partner with him in the gospel. And he's now presently at Ephesus, and he will stay there until Pentecost. So our Pentecost is the Pentecost is the day the Holy Spirit came. The Jewish festival celebrated 50 days after Passover. That is the harvest. And Pentecost for us would be somewhere in June. So he will stay there somewhere until June in Ephesus. Then he probably plans to go to Macedonia, and then from there go to Corinth for the winter months. Okay, so the reason for remaining there in Ephesus is the great evangelistic opportunity, the gospel, sharing the gospel, which is also accompanied by much opposition. There are people giving problems, which he mentioned in 15, verse 32, and in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 8 to 11, he will talk about fighting beasts. Yeah, his life in danger from beasts. Okay, maybe just a quick look at chapter 15, verse 32. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 32. Oh, that I yeah, correct.
Okay, I'll read the 1 Corinthians 15:32. If in a manner of man I have fought with beasts at Ephesus, what advantage is it to me if the dead do not rise? Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die.
Thank you. So that was talking about the resurrection, but he introduced the idea that he was actually facing problems from people in Ephesus. And he talks about it like, I fought wild beasts in Ephesus. Not so much real animals, okay, that we discussed in chapter 15, but people in Ephesus giving him lots of problems, right? So he is there sharing the gospel, but he's facing a lot of problems from people who behave like wild beasts. And so we can see that Paul is not a faint-hearted evangelist. He's not afraid of opposition or obstacles. So we see his travel plans. Now he talks about Timothy. Somebody unmute and read for us these 2 verses.
If Timothy comes, see to it that he has nothing to fear while he is with you, for he is carrying on the work of the Lord, just as I am. No one then should refuse to accept him. Send him on his way in peace, so that he may return to me. I am expecting him along with the brothers.
Thank you. Okay, so all these things that we have just been covering about Paul's travel plans. Okay, this map that we are talking about, going to Macedonia or coming to the Corinthians. Try to remember, because next book that we're doing is 2 Corinthians. This will come back, okay, and it becomes a problem between Paul and some people in the church. So the travel plans, as well as this idea of Timothy, okay. So it becomes a problem that later on, when we do 2 Corinthians, we need to know this background. So do bear in mind this part here. Okay, so Paul actually wrote the letter of 1 Corinthians. He sent it to the Corinthians, and then he sent Timothy after that to visit them. Okay, you get the sequence. Paul wrote a letter, this First Corinthians, he sent it to the Corinthian church, okay? And after the letter has gone to the Corinthian church, he sends Timothy to them. So that's why he says, if Timothy comes, right? So the if suggests that, well, see whether he really arrives or not. But if he does, okay, and why is that? Why is that this case that he sends a letter, but he doesn't send Timothy with a letter? Because there are certain problems brewing in the church, okay? And the problems will bounce back on Paul himself, right? So he sends Timothy as a person to try to find out what happened after the first letter that he sent. Okay, so he says, if Timothy comes, see to it that he has nothing to fear while he is with you. Okay, so Paul is concerned for Timothy. And Timothy is his tried, proven, and trusted fellow worker. See, Timothy was that young man that Paul picked up on his missionary journey, okay? And that young man has been working with him all this while. So take a look at Philippians 2, verses 19 to 23 to see the kind of relationship and Paul has with Timothy and the kind of person Timothy is. Philippians 2.
Philippians 2, Philippians chapter 2, 19 to 23. I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, that I also may be cheered when I receive news about you. I have no one else like him who will show genuine concern for your welfare. For everyone looks out for their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know that Timothy has proved himself, because as a son with his father, he has served with me in the work of the gospel. I hope, therefore, to send him as soon as I see how things go with me.
Thank you. All right, so he has actually done this thing before where he sends Timothy ahead of him, right, where the Philippian church is concerned. Okay, so he will send Timothy to the church and Timothy will gather news for Paul, right? Gather news for Paul. And you can see in this particular reference that Timothy is somebody who has a genuine interest in their welfare. Okay, and he says that not everyone looks out for the interest of Christ, but they look out for their own interests, whereas Timothy has proved himself. Okay, so he has got very high praise for this young man that has become his tried, proven, and trusted fellow worker. See, it's because Timothy has worked with him for a long time, long enough for him to see what kind of person, what kind of Christian Timothy is. So he is concerned that if Timothy comes, they should receive Timothy properly and not treat him badly just because, number one, he's very young. And number two, some of them don't like Paul. So Timothy is a young man. The situation in Corinth is difficult enough for the experienced Paul. So imagine for Timothy being a younger person, it will be more difficult, likely be worse. And some people may retaliate against Paul by the way they treat his protege, this Timothy that he's guiding and training in the Lord, and fellow worker of Paul. So Paul calls for them to respect Timothy because he's doing God's work, like Paul, see? For he is carrying on the work of the Lord, just as I am. So he tells them to respect Timothy because Timothy is doing God's work. So sending him on his way in peace may refer to the Jewish custom of shalom. Shalom, we talk about peace, shalom, right? But the Jewish custom of shalom involved a spiritual benediction and providing his needs as a traveler. So a certain amount of support to make sure that he has financial needs met, as well as maybe some food on the way. Okay, so we can actually learn some things. Can people look beyond themselves and the personal hang-ups? Why I say this is because there are people who may retaliate against Paul, right? And they take it out on Timothy. Yeah, it is common that people who do not like or agree with a worker refuse to get along with, cooperate, respect, or help. People behave based on their own inclinations. You know, I don't like Paul, so I'm not going to help. I don't like Paul, so I don't want to have anything to support Timothy. All right, so they behave based on their personal inclinations and differences. And they actually don't have regard for God, who is the one whose work and purpose must be served. See, that's the thing about people in the church. We have our conflicts with each other, and then we don't want to be involved. We don't want to have anything to do with those people. We don't want to serve, right? We don't want to serve. We don't want to help out. But actually, it shows that we are refusing to regard God because the work and the purpose is God's. Yeah, but we make it personal against people in the church. It may offend some people to be told this, but such behavior reveals the fact that they value their own opinions and preferences, more than the honor and love they claim to give God. Okay, so this is the actual meaning and reality of people who hold back, don't want to be involved because, I don't like these people, don't like this ministry, I don't like the people doing it. And so personal quarrel becomes something that we shut God out actually. Paul's call to the Corinthians to receive Timothy so that he may go on his way in peace is an appeal to each person to rise above themselves and put aside their personal bias and differences. Okay, so this is the thing here. Rise above ourselves and put aside our personal bias and differences. Each one must acknowledge that no matter what and how they feel, they must not hinder God's work and service by not accepting and cooperating with God's workers. So you can see Paul is actually cautioning them, don't let your personal hang-ups and differences hinder the work of God. So pretty interesting because now his teaching gets quite personal. The implication is check ourselves. Now he goes on, verse 12, to talk about Apollos. Okay, one verse only. Can somebody read for us?
Okay, I read chapter 16, verse 12. Now about our brother Apollos, I strongly urge him to go to you with the brothers. He was quite unwilling to go now, but he will go when he has the opportunity.
Thank you. All right, so if you remember when we started this letter, when we started doing this letter, Paul addressed the Corinthians' problem of being divided over their spiritual teachers. Let's just refresh memory, okay? Can somebody read chapter 1, verse 12 to remind us? It's so long ago. Chapter 1, verse 12.
1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 12. Some of you are saying, I am a follower of Paul. Others are saying, I follow Apollos, or I follow Peter, or I follow only Christ.
Thank you. Okay, so these were the quarrels that they had that Paul highlighted from the very beginning of the letter. Their division over their spiritual teachers. And you see that shows, once again, it shows how ignorant they are. Yeah, how ignorant yet prideful. They're quarreling over their spiritual teachers, following Paul, following Apollos, Peter, and Christ. You see, at the end of the day, you're Christians because of Christ. Why are you following this, following that? Okay, so from the very beginning, one party identified themselves as followers of Apollos. Their foundation in their heart is really, really wrong. And it appears that the Corinthians have asked for Apollos to return. All right, the motive of some of them is clearly suspect. Motive is clearly suspect. They prefer this alternative to having Paul return for an extended stay. So they don't want Paul, they want Apollos. So those are the people who support Apollos. In spite of all this, Paul has urged Apollos to return to Corinth to minister. So Paul is not a green-eyed monster jealous of Apollos. Okay? Is quite willing for Apollos to go and go back and teach the Corinthian Christians who support him. But the other thing is Apollos, on the other hand, is actually very sensible. Okay, Paul is generous in not trying to say, no, Apollos, you cannot go, because you go, then your supporters will support you, and my supporters support me, and you know, this party spirit. Apollos is actually very careful about the situation. Apollos is no doubt aware of the splits. He's unwilling to return to Corinth. So that tells us Apollos is with Paul in Ephesus. Okay, and he doesn't want to become embroiled in this environment where people try to side him, you know, pull him over to their side and say, we support you, you are our spiritual teacher. He is wise to know that when a church is torn with party politics, there is a time when it is wiser and more far-sighted to stay away. So he knows, don't go and make the situation worse. Apollos responds that he will come when he has the opportunity. Literally, he means when the time is right. See here, he will go when he has the opportunity. He's quite willing to go now. See the word unwilling. So he doesn't want to go and make himself build a kingdom of Apollos in the Corinthian church. Yeah, see, building your own kingdom. He doesn't want to do that. We're all building the kingdom of Christ, kingdom of God, not our own kingdom. Okay, so he responds, I will go when I have opportunity. So it's not opportunity, it's not the right time. This suggests that he has judged that accepting the invitation at this time will not be in the interest of the congregation. So sometimes giving the church what they want is actually not going to help them. It's not in their interest, given the tension between Paul and the church. And it's interesting that Apollos is content for Paul to reply on his behalf. See, Apollos is quite happy for Paul to answer in the letter. So there is clearly no competitive spirit between Paul and Apollos. Neither would Apollos be flattered by the Corinthians to go there, given their motives. Right, so you can see here, Apollos is very careful not to be prideful. So here is an issue of pride for Apollos. Wow, I have supporters, man. Okay, so he is careful not to allow pride to eat into him and say, I should go because there are people who support me. Yeah, not everybody supports Paul, but there are people who support me, so I should go. He doesn't have that kind of pride. Okay, Paul will later record the attitude of Christian workers in Corinth who succumbed to the secular competitive spirit. 2 Corinthians 10 verse 12. We will talk about that in the next book. So let's look now at his last, how he ends off the letters with his greetings and exhortations. Okay, can somebody unmute and read for us, please, from verse 13 to 24?
First Corinthians 16, verse 13 to 24. Be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, be men of courage, be strong. Do everything in love. You know that the household of Stephanus were the first converts in Achaia, and they have devoted themselves to the service of the saints. I urge you, brothers, to submit to such as these and to everyone who joins in the work and labors at it. Verse 17, I was glad when Stephanus, Fortunatus, and Achaicus arrived, because they have supplied what was lacking from you. For they refreshed my spirit and yours also. Such men deserve recognition. Verse 19, the church in the province of Asia send you greetings. Aquila and Priscilla greet you warmly in the Lord, and so does a church that meets at their house. All the brothers here send you greetings. Greet one another with a holy kiss. I, Paul, write this greeting in my own hand. If anyone does not love the Lord, a curse be on him. Come, O Lord. Verse 23, the grace of our Lord Jesus be with you. My love to all of you in Christ Jesus. Amen.
Thank you. Amen. So that is the end of his letter. All right. His last greetings and exhortations, telling them what to do. Okay. So the letter closes on very practical matters. Paul begins with a series of 5 imperatives. Imperatives is something like commands. He commands verses 13 to 14. He says 5 commands. Be on your guard. Okay, be on your guard. That means be alert. Number 2, stand firm in the faith. Okay, don't shake, don't backslide. Be men of courage, be brave. Number 4, be strong. So brave and strong. And finally, do everything in love. Remember his 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter. Do everything in love. So the first 4 commands have a military background. Yeah, so it's like a soldier. The faithful Christian is like a soldier, and he requires alertness and discipline. Okay, the first 4 commands, be alert and disciplined, in other words. These commands are given for them to reflect and act on the various issues Paul has covered in the course of his letter. So Paul has written many issues, okay? So his command is to reflect and act on those things that he has discussed. The Corinthians are called to be on your guard. So be alert. Being alert would include their secular ways of thinking. So check your own thinking. Example, chapter 1, verse 17 to 31 talks about the wisdom. Yeah, they think they are very wise, but their wisdom is the wisdom of the world. Okay, so Paul is saying, check your secular way of thinking, be on your guard. And that includes concerning Apollos and Paul, whom they split up. Yeah, I follow this, I follow that. Actually, you're a Christian, you should be following Christ, not following this teacher or that teacher. Okay, so it is a wrong attitude and it is the wrong action, the wrong thinking. And then their wrong attitudes, gospel ministry, and also their wrong behavior. So you can see they have lots of things to think about, to correct themselves, to be on their guard against. Standing firm in the faith of Christ crucified and resurrected calls for them to persevere in holding the right faith. So you'll be on your guard, check your thinking, your attitudes, your behavior. Now uphold the right faith so that worldly values do not continue to be part of their church values or to become part of their church values, right? So they have to check that the values of the pagan Corinthian society that they are living in does not continue to invade and mutate their faith, contaminate their faith. Okay, have to uphold the right beliefs. It's the same for us today. It's the same for every generation of Christians. The world's beliefs will always try to come in to mix with our Christian beliefs, and they will mutate and change our Christian beliefs so that it becomes a mixture. We have to stand firm in the faith. Now, the call to be people of courage and be strong involves resisting pressure to mold ministry by slick secular reasoning, right? The way of thinking of the world. Oratory, remember, they are all very good speakers. They are people who talk very well, and practices. Okay. For example, following Paul's own example, chapter 4, verse 8 to 16. So those are the 4 imperatives or commands that are like a soldier, need alertness. See, alertness to be on your guard against all these, stand firm in the faith, and then people of courage and strong. And the last one tempers the whole approach. And the call to do everything in love could be a rebuke to their divisiveness and jealousy, right? All the problems that they created, and the motives behind issuing the invitation to Apollos to return. So whatever they face that threaten or challenge the Christian walk, Christian faith and practice, whatever they face that threaten or challenge these, as Christian soldiers of God, they must approach and balance all with love. Okay, balance all with love. So we recall chapter 13. Remember the first 3 verses. Whatever we may be, whatever we may do, whatever we may give, without the motivation and action of godly love, it all comes down to nothing. I am nothing. I have nothing. Okay, so Paul goes on to talk about the people among them. He has already mentioned Stephanas in chapter 1, verse 16. Stephanas was one of the first converts. Yeah, he and his household were the first fruits of Paul's ministry in Achaia and days. And Paul commends or praises Stephanas and his household for putting themselves at the service of the church. So they are the first Christians, and they have been very faithful to serve the church. They have devoted themselves to use their resources for God's people. Okay, so they have been very generous in their partnership, in their offerings, in their sacrifices, in their giving voluntarily. Just now we talk about giving, right? Now, Paul calls for submission to men like these and everyone who labors in Christian work. Right, verse 16, he tells the church to submit to these people and basically those who labor in their Christian work. These rights that Christians submit to those who serve them for their benefit and development, whether physically, spiritually, or both. Okay, so people who help the church to grow spiritually or meet their needs physically. In the same way, for application, we should submit to Christ in his service and all that he has done for us. I should say Christ and his workers, yeah? Christ and his workers in his service. So we see that Stephanas, Fortunatus, and Achaicus have visited Paul in Ephesus. They were the ones who brought him the first-hand information of the things happening at Corinth, and they also supplied his needs. Okay, so now we talk about Stephanas, putting themselves to help the church. So now they also help Paul by supplying his needs. They deserve recognition and respect for their practical support for both Paul and their fellow Corinthians, thus refreshing their spirits. Right? So these people have done much for Christ by serving the people of Christ, right? Whether the workers or simply the fellow people in the family of God. Paul, you can see he constantly highlights Christians who are worthy of recognition and respect for their contributions to the work of God, whether in sharing the gospel or opening their homes to the church, so hospitality, providing hospitality and supplies to meet the needs of traveling ministry workers. So he highlights these Christians because they are worthy of recognition and respect. This gives recognition of the application of Christian faith. Right? So by doing these things, these people are putting their Christian faith into action and loving service to Christ. Right? Application of Christian faith, showing they love Christ. Through their ministry to fellow Christians. It's also encouraging everyone to do their part. Remember, we are all body of Christ. So when he praises those people who are doing all these things, it's actually encouraging everybody to do their part. Remember, everybody has a part to play. Okay? By making known the work of these saints, is telling people, look, these are the things all of us should be doing. Okay? In the different forms that we all serve, all of us should serve Christ and fellow Christians in these ways. And in this way, the church is being built up. As the gospel is being shared with those who have yet to receive Christ, so reaching out to the non-Christians. Paul ends with greetings from churches in the province of Asia, of which Ephesus is the capital. Okay, so he is in Ephesus and he conveys warm greetings from Aquila and Priscilla and the church that meets at their house. This couple, they are Jews and tent makers like Paul. We have met them before, but this is a revision. They have been settled in Rome, but in AD 4950, the Emperor Claudius issued a decree that said all Jews are to leave Rome. So Aquila and Priscilla went to Corinth, where Paul first met them, and that was in Acts 18, verse 2. And then from Corinth, they went to Ephesus, and that's where they are with Paul. So Paul sends their greetings to their friends in Corinth. And Romans 16, verse 3 shows that they actually went back to Rome and settled there, and they have a house church there again. One interesting discovery about them is they show how easy and natural travel was at that time. So it was quite easy for them, even though ancient times, for them to travel. Okay, and so they worked their way, they followed their trade, they worked from Palestine, that means Israel there, to Rome, and then went to Corinth, and then went to Ephesus, and then went back to Rome. So quite easy to travel around for Roman people, for Roman citizens at that time. Huh? In those early days, there were no church buildings. So early days, there no church building like we have today. It's only in the 3rd century that you hear about a church building. The little congregations met in private homes. Right? So congregations met in private homes, and the Christian fellowship met in a house that had a big room. And wherever Aquila and Priscilla went, they opened their home for church meetings and hospitality. You can read that in Romans 16, verse 3 to 5. Their hospitality. So all the brothers here in verse 20, the first part, probably will include Paul's co-workers that he supports financially by working. 20 verse 34. Acts 20:34 shows us Paul was sharing the gospel, but he was also working to get the income to support himself and his fellow missionaries. Right, so you can see that Paul didn't want to be a burden on the churches, and he didn't want the churches to have that thinking that I want to share the gospel with you so that I can get money out of you. Yeah, he's not sharing the gospel to gain money, just like the philosophers and the orators in their time, okay, who are getting rich because they give talks and training. But Paul does not do that kind of thing, to show that the gospel is not for him to make money out of people and get himself rich. Gospel must not have the wrong reputation among people. So as the church in Asia sends their greetings, it calls on the Corinthians to greet each other as members of the Holy Brotherhood with a holy kiss. A little bit about the holy kiss. This was a kiss of peace. It was their custom. Okay? And apparently they do it at the end of prayers and just before they took communion. It was very interesting. Just before they took communion, they had the holy kiss. It was a sign and symbol that they sat at the table, joined together in perfect love. Remember the one of the teachings he gave was that when you take communion, you must examine yourself, right? You must check yourself. Is there something not right in you that you need to address and deal with? So it looks like this holy kiss was given just before they took that communion. It means, it implies that they have a chance to make up with each other through a holy kiss. So through this holy kiss before they take their communion, they actually learn to say, okay, I release my issue, my problem with you. So I give you a holy kiss. So interesting, right? That they actually do this before they take communion to show that they are joined together in perfect love. Okay? Joined together in perfect love. Let me put that down. Now, Cyril of Jerusalem, one of the church fathers, writes about it. Don't think that this kiss is like the kiss that you give your friend when you meet your friend in the marketplace. It's not given promiscuously. It's not sexual. Huh? And in later times, it was not given between men and women, so they don't cross gender. But it was given between men and men, between woman and woman, right? Sometimes it was given not on the lips, but on the hand. So you kiss the hand. A little bit like the Muslims nowadays. It came to be called simply the peace. Now, why did this kiss of love fade from the church life? Because it was liable to abuse. You know, the heathen slander, the non-Christians will interpret this as, oh, you know, these people are so promiscuous. They kiss each other around. They are not very moral. Okay, they're sexually immoral people. So it could become misinterpreted, and there may be individuals among the church who are likely to abuse it in the way they kiss. So quite dirty-minded, some people might be. So the church became less and less of a fellowship is another reason, because when they were doing house churches, those were small, right? And they all know each other well. They are friend and friend, where all were closely bound together. And where you're close friends is a very natural thing to do. But when the house fellowship became a big congregation, little room became a big church, then this kind of intimacy was lost. You know, you don't go around kissing strangers because the church is now very big. Okay, so it's not It's not something that you would do when you go around kissing strangers. Kiss of love. Yeah. So that was where in time this kiss of love faded from the church. Now, up to this point in time, Paul has a secretary writing the letter. But now, towards the end, Paul takes a pen and sends his own personal greeting, and he includes a warning against anyone who does not love Christ. And he uses also the Aramaic phrase, Maranatha, which means come, O Lord. Say his warning, if anyone does not love the Lord, a curse be on him, come, O Lord. It is unusual that an Aramaic phrase is used in a Greek letter to a Greek church. Explanation is the phrase has become a watchword. Okay, it's a watchword to sum up the vital hope of the early church. Yeah. Maranatha, come, O Lord. So they are looking forward to the coming of Christ. Christians identify each other by it in a language that the heathen cannot understand, talking about Christ's coming. Okay, we see that Paul started the letter with a greeting of grace, you see, chapter 1 verse 3, grace and peace to you, and he ends it with the grace of Christ. Grace of Christ be with you, and then he talks about my love to all of you. And it's a testimony to God's grace that in spite of attitudes towards him, Paul's love, imitating that of Christ, does not change. You see the way some of them they have attitudes towards Paul, okay? His love still to them does not change. Because why? He sees them in Christ Jesus. Okay? He sees them in Christ Jesus. There is a relationship in Christ that does not allow him to feel that there is a barrier between us, there's a division between us. And that's the attitude we must have. Okay, it's a challenge for us to imitate Paul's love and grace to those who have attitudes toward us, and to examine our own less than loving and gracious attitudes toward others. Okay, so imitate Paul's love and grace, even though they are prejudiced against him. So to round off, you see that first 4 chapters of 1 Corinthians deal with the divided state of the church. And instead of being a unity in Christ, they break into parties and they attach themselves to those party leaders. As Paul's teaching that these divisions had emerged because they thought too much about human wisdom and knowledge and too little about the sheer grace of God. In fact, for all their so-called wisdom, they are really in a state of immaturity. Really in a state, they are immature babies. They think they are wise, but they are no better than babies. Okay, so we are finished. And throughout the book, Paul addresses the issues that show the inadequacies of many areas of practice, right? In the Corinthian church, their behaviors and their attitudes. These are more worldly than they know, or more worldly than they would admit. So we have seen some of these issues, okay? And Paul teaches that the exercise of divine love is the answer to all their problems, okay? Divine love is the answer to all their actions and attitudes. Okay, my time is up. So let me just have a prayer, and then I play the charity song, okay? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for your love. Thank you for your goodness and your faithfulness to us. And we thank you, Lord, that you teach us so much about yourself, teach us so much about love, teach us so much about ourselves and our practices and even our attitudes and hearts as Christians. And we really need to examine ourselves, because these people show that they may be thinking of themselves as mature Christians, but they are actually very immature and worldly. Help us, O Lord, to be careful so that we may not be hiding this kind of pride without understanding ourselves. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so I'm going to finish already.
Okay,
Those who want to stay
Finish
and
already,
just
yeah.
listen to, I finished this book